we're going to go, or we may actually leapfrog over it because the technology is there. It's expensive to change. So remember when we used to have we'd swipe the card, and then they started with the chip. Those chips were actually created in the early 90s, but it didn't catch on in the United States. Europe mandated it, so they required the merchants to buy the new devices in order to use the chip. So we, because of all the data breaches and all the concerns, we are using the chip. I don't think chip technology is really much better than the swiping, my personal opinion, because I think there's ways to de-encrypt that and still steal the data. But the one area that is actually almost virtually foolproof is biometrics. And we've heard a little bit about it. And that's either retinal scan or fingerprint. And it's also heat sensitive. So I'm not going to tell you the gory story the FBI told me about how effective that is, but your finger or your eye doesn't stay at the right heat temperature for more than 15 minutes outside of the body. So if someone was trying to steal your identity, they'd have to take your thumb or your eye out of your person. But it's only good for 15 minutes, so you got to buy real quick, right? So it is a very good way to actually have a secure method of payment. Again, what's the problem? The problem is that technology hasn't caught up to the usage. Some of the speedy entry, like Canada has this, they do have retinal scans there, and some merchants are testing this. But again, it's all going to be about consumer adoption and the technology to catch up to. But I think that's probably the safest way. It'll reduce fraud and account takeover. Speaking of account takeover, so this is just a sidebar, but so I actually was at a couple different FBI briefings, and you know, everybody's worried about their social security number being compromised and your credit card information, your personal data. It's all out there. They took us into this room, and it was down in the basement of the FBI building. And I was like, whoa, I don't feel real comfortable about this because I'm at the FBI and they're taking us down in the basement. But there was a large group of people, so I figured we could all run together. But they actually went onto the dark web, and they said, don't do this at home because we will know it's you. So they actually have a lot more technology in the FBI than I think some people really understand. But they showed us this website. And there's about 40, believe it or not, there's only about 40 of these people around the world that actually steal and hack your data and information. And then they sell it on these websites using Bitcoin because it's not traceable regardless of what you've heard. It is traceable if you get the actual laptop they did the transaction from, but if the good criminals aren't going to get caught because they're going to be long gone after they've done the transactions. But in any event, they have a whole line, and it was amazing, of data. It has your name, your address, your mother's maiden name, your social security number, your credit card number, your CVC number. Remember, you're not supposed to be able to get those? These hackers are pretty good. And they have, you can buy a line, one line of data, and these are the criminals that actually do the account takeovers, for $5 in Bitcoin. And they said, we want to draw your attention to the bottom of the screen because it said a money-back guarantee if you don't get a positive hit on the data that we sold you, we'll give you your money back. So there is honor among thieves, believe it or not. So again, so if you're worried about your data being out there, it is out there. But the one thing that's changed that I think a lot of people don't understand, the credit card companies and obviously folks like PayPal, we have very advanced systems that can tell whether it's you doing the transaction. Which leads me to the whole point about artificial intelligence. So why can't we use that data and that information, the power of artificial intelligence, and do all of this money laundering and terrorist financing in a split second and screen these transactions as opposed to infringing on the consumer, taking information that they don't need? They can actually, one of the companies that we bought at PayPal used, if you wanted to sign on without giving all your data, your social security number and your information, they could use your Facebook login. Because they can verify who you are. They also helps them better identify which transactions look legitimate based on your patterns of behavior. Interesting, all this testimony is going on the past 2 days with Facebook, but it's amazing the data that they have. But it's amazing the data that we can utilize in this ecosystem to better verify you, be less intrusive to you personally, but also be more effective in getting the bad guys. So it's a fascinating world, and if it's something you're interested in, I would encourage you to do it because it's going to be the wave of the future. Artificial intelligence is really where we're going to move to. So what's the real future of money? You know, I remember watching Star Trek when I was a little kid, and you know, when they had the doors that opened electronically. We have those now, right? Back then, when I was a little kid, it was a long, long time ago. That was really very futuristic. But think about that I could telepathically look at you and transfer money into your account. I don't know. Maybe somebody comes up with that, create an app for it, and you'll be a billionaire like Mark Zuckerberg. So what are the future opportunities in this whole area of money laundering, compliance, artificial intelligence? So I listed two. The one obvious one is coding. So again, like I never wanted to be an accountant, I never want to be a coder. I have trouble sometimes just turning on my computer. So I'm long past the day that that's ever going to be a career opportunity for me. And web design that goes along with it, because that's part of that process. But the other area for those of you who are interested in policy, like I am, is really the whole area of policy. How do we change? How do we get the government to change the way they think about not just financial services, but about every industry, to make it more streamlined and more efficient? And to make it so that we can actually use the abilities that we have with the technology we have today to solve the problem, as opposed to just letting it continue to happen. Because when you see things like these big money laundering lawsuits against the banks that are still happening today after all of this time, since 1970, the banks still haven't gotten it right. We're not doing the right thing. We're making the donuts, but we're not solving the problem. So I think it's a great area for policy if you're interested in policy. If you want to go to Washington, there's great opportunities. And even some of the large think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, or in Delaware, the Caesar Rodney Institute, do study on all of these kinds of things, which is fascinating to me and I think could be very fascinating to you. So with that, I'll open it up for questions if I can. Sure. I've lost you all at my story from Wilmington Trust. Sure.
So you mentioned how the eye scan and the fingerprint scan are actually the most protected. I know that there's a lot of people that are reluctant to kind of give over their eye or fingerprint or face ID or whatever to the government. Do you think this is a realistic worry?
Again, that's always the problem. It's customer adoption, right? So the technology to go to the gas pump to swipe your card, that technology was actually created in the 60s. It didn't become relevant because people weren't comfortable adopting doing it until the 90s. So it really is about technology, security, privacy, which is a concern of most people, and with all the conversations we're hearing about Facebook and our privacy of our data and our information, it's all going to depend on customer adoption. But frankly, from my perspective, I think it's safer, it's better. You won't have as much you can eliminate account takeover. Because again, if you've registered your eye or your thumbprint with a third-party service provider like a bank or something, again, the concern would be somebody's going to steal that data and they're going to have it, but it doesn't matter because you still have to have the eye or the thumbprint to do the transaction. And it's safer, it's quicker, and it's more efficient. So, did that answer your question? Yeah, John.
Would you mind answering a question outside of just artificial intelligence?
Sure.
I'm a gay Republican, and I just have a quick question. If you were elected to the United States Senate, would you support the Equality Act or no?
Actually, the question's been asked of me, and I responded to a survey from the Washington Blade, and my view is on the Equal Rights Act and amendment. Our Constitution is a beautiful thing, and there are already protections and rights for everyone. So I would not support the act as it was presented to me in that questionnaire, or as it's currently presented under the law, because I don't think we need it, because those protections are already there. And so what it would do, in my view, which is the problem, I think, we have a First Amendment that allows for freedom of speech and freedom of religion. And when you create a special class for individuals by changing that law. It will ultimately go to the Supreme Court, because the debate is going to be whether or not you can restrict the rights of our First Amendment freedom of religion by creating special rights for a class of people. So I would not support it.
One more quick question. I know that in the article, I've read the article, it talks about that you feel that the rights are already protected in the Constitution and for LGBT people, and that the Supreme Court decision, I guess in a sense, to you is enough. But by saying that you are against the Equality Act, that means you are against amending the Civil Rights Act to include protections based on sexual orientation of the LGBT community.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question, but mine's pretty nerdy, and it's from my money laundering presentation this week.
Okay, sure.
Later.
Oh, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, if anybody wants to talk about policy questions too, I'll be happy to stay after the event.
So you mentioned Bitcoin, and I don't know a ton about Bitcoin, but does it concern you at all? I have no position on this, but Bitcoin, it's a currency. It trades like not really like a currency would trade because it's not backed by anything. But does the volatility that causes by nature concern you at all?
It does. So actually, the then CEO at PayPal in 2011 asked me about, Gene, because Bitcoin was only 2 years old. It started in 2009. Should we be getting into this Bitcoin thing? And I said, well, let my team do a white paper on it, and we'll come back to you in a little bit of time, because there wasn't a lot known about it. And it was the only virtual currency, cryptocurrency at the time. There are now thousands of them. And at the time, it was about $100 trading, or under $100. And I said, when we finished the conclusion, I'll tell you what my conclusion was, but at the time, I said, oh, this isn't going to go anywhere. So don't take investment advice from me, because obviously it did go a lot of places, but it's also going back and forth, and it is very volatile. But the actual cryptocurrency process originally, and I actually spoke to Patrick Merck, who was the chairman of the Bitcoin Foundation. The people who created it claim that it's completely transparent, and it wouldn't allow for money laundering, and it actually does, because unless you identify the individuals on the front and back end, all you know is an IP address in a computer that's logged and shows the transaction. So it's used today. Silk Road, I think if you may have heard of, and a few of the other underground processes which were created specifically to sell illegal drugs and other things, use Bitcoin exclusively. I personally don't think Bitcoin will be the cryptocurrency that survives. But what I told Patrick at the time, I said, the fix that I would see is if you create a metadata tag, an electronic data tag to the transaction flow that identifies the individuals on both ends, and that can only be unencrypted by people in the system or in the ecosystem, the financial institutions or those recording the data, then you solve the problem. And he said, Gene, that's exactly what we're trying to do, but the ecosystem doesn't want to do it because it's too hard, it's too complicated, it'll take too long, it's too expensive. But ultimately what's going to happen is there's going to be a huge breach. Mt. Go is an example. Someone hacked into Mt. Go. That was a Chinese Bitcoin cryptocurrency payment system. And they went out of business, and people lost billions of dollars. So what they did to fix the problem, which was slap on this old process, and the old process was you have to open an account with a company like Coinbase or Circle or some of the other payment processors that actually process Bitcoin, and you have to give all the same information you would have to do if you went to open an account with a bank. So again, it doesn't use the technology that's been created to help make it fast, easy, and inexpensive, and you've layered this whole fashioned kind of verification process on top of it. So, where it's going to go, I don't know. But I think, again, for all of you, if you can come up with a solution, you could be billionaires. So there's a lot of future, I think.